Great. So here we are, live, and good morning to everybody. Welcome to the podcast, this Wednesday's morning podcast about the Bike Scouts and how they work in disaster response and community resilience in the Philippines. We have had Miles before. Miles, welcome to the podcast. Thank you very much for joining us again this time, and we're very happy to have you here. I believe that everybody who is on LinkedIn has already met Miles there and read his posts about community resilience, how to build it, and why it is so important to work on a very local level when it comes to disaster response and building those capabilities within the local communities. But before we move to into the main body of the podcast, I just want to say thank you to our first sponsor, and you already know that is Kanachu, or as they are known online, kanachu.com. You can connect there with James Howell. He's quite active on LinkedIn. If you haven't connected with him there, please do, James Howell. You can message him there, or also send him a message at james@kanachu.com. They are based in Yokohama and they work in buying and selling real estate investment and property management in the area. So thanks a lot to Kanachu. And now we're back to the main body of the podcast. Miles, again, before I let you talk, I want to give the word to Tim just for a very brief introduction because we have been talking about you and what you do, and Tim really wants to share some thoughts
Yeah.
of his about your
No,
great
I,
work.
I I love having Miles on. Miles, I always learn when you're on, but the way you think really resonates with me, and I was kind of reflecting on why. And one thing is, I've worked with and had friendships with lots of Filipino people in my life, and I vibe with Filipino people. I have a tremendous amount of respect. And the first time I went, it was like 1978. And I remember I just met so many people and they were just so friendly and they forward looking and positive. And sometimes they lived in terrible conditions, but there was this energy, right? And then years later in the 90s, I ran a factory and I had like 12 people from immigrants from around the world, like 12 different countries, right? And one group was the Filipinos. And they were like objectively, statistically, I measured work output, right? They were the highest performers, right? And they were always just really positive. And one of them became my right hand man. He was just so talented, you know. And so even at that level, working with Filipinos, I don't know why, but I just vibe with you guys, right? Um, and then the other thing is what you're doing, even though it's in the Philippines, it's all applicable to Japan. It can be transferred. You know, you got to think about how to do it, obviously, but the concept works in Japan too because we both live in areas that are vulnerable to natural disasters. You know, it's where we are geographically
Mm.
located, right? But what I think I appreciate the most, and this is again my background in manufacturing, we used to do Kaizen things, right? And there is so much creativity involved, but you're in a box, right? And when there was a problem to be solved, my compatriots would come up with a Rube Goldberg $1 million automation system solution. And youngsters, if you don't know who Rube Goldberg is, Google it. It's entertaining. It's worth it, right? All this overly complicated, expensive, capital intensive solution. And the Japanese would come up with like an 89-cent solution, and it was more effective. Like, and we were taught to prioritize our actions by the basic three following criteria: high impact, low cost, and you can do it quickly. And that makes sense from any country that traditionally did not have natural resources. You have to be resourceful. You don't have a lot of capital floating around. But my point is the simplicity of what you're trying to do resonates with me because that's kind of how I think too. So that's kind of like why I really like having Miles on. We're here to promote his cause because it's a really, really good cause. And if anyone out there, after listening to Miles, can introduce him or us to people who, maybe might be interested in helping out, we would really, really appreciate that. So that's kind of my intro. So thank you. Good morning.
Hello.
Hey.
Hi.
Yeah, is it my turn?
Yeah, it's your
Yeah.
turn.
Yeah.
I'm gonna shut up now for the moment.
Well, good morning again to everyone, and thank you so much to Maya and Tim for having me on the show. I always love being here because, as you can see, this is a very, very supportive podcast, and I don't get a lot of that actually in my line of work. So it's sort of like a refresher. It sort of like reinvigorates me in a way
Good.
whenever I have these conversations with you guys. Um, then I don't feel so alone anymore in trying
Thank
to accomplish the things that we need to do here in the Philippines for resilience. Yeah. Speaking of like coming up with simple solutions, that actually sort of like goes back to my one of my original inspirations for the Bike Scouts project. For those who are not familiar with the Bike Scouts project yet, so we started in 2013 on the day that Typhoon Yolanda made landfall in the Philippines. So we worked as volunteer bicycle messengers, providing an alternative means of access to communications, information, and essential supplies to people isolated by the storm. And so for the past 11 years, we've been doing the exact same thing for almost all of the major disasters in the Philippines, including the Taal volcano eruption in 2020, the Category 5 Typhoon Odette 2021, and everything else in between. So going back to my story, one of my original inspirations for Bike Scouts was actually a story from way, way back there in Japan, in Japanese history. So um, I'm going to share this again. I know I've mentioned this before, but I'm going to share this again. My grandfather used to work in Japanese shipping. So he was a ship's engineer. And one thing that he would bring back from Japan would be magazines. Mostly from crafts, about crafts and Japanese history. And I read that like over and over again. Back then, there was no internet. So that's how old I am. So that was my internet. And one of the stories that I came across was actually this Japanese guy. He owned, I believe, a soy sauce factory. And then one day there was a tsunami, like middle of the night, I think. And he had to find a way to help sort of like the people in his own community get to safety because it was like pitch black. And so what he did, because he was using sort of like rice sheaves from his factory, so he put that along the road and set fire to that so that people would find their way safely to higher ground, and that's how he helped save the people in his own community. So in a way, Bike Scouts is trying to do that because every time, I mean, we're very, very thankful that there are like these like magnificent ideas, these like very, very advanced technology that they're trying to bring into the Philippines to help with resilience. But there are a lot of things here that can actually be solved with simple solutions, with very human solutions that are already here, that are already being done. But the main problem is that there's no support, there's no investment of any kind. And when I say investment, I'm not saying millions and billions of dollars that's usually invested in like building technologies and things. It's like a fraction of the investment that's needed to make it happen. But yeah, like riding bicycles. Bicycles are everywhere in the Philippines, and it's very normal for Filipinos to ride bicycles to school, to work, to sell things, to go to their neighbor and do all kinds of things. I used to ride bicycles going to school, right? Actually, so yeah, so that's the reason why I set up the Bike Scouts project, because when it comes to resilience, when it comes to when disasters happen, one of the major problems is the lack of mobility, because in the Philippines is a country where when a storm passes by, the roads, the bridges, the utilities are all impacted very badly, and so there's no way for people to communicate, to get in touch. And so I was thinking that, because I used to race mountain bikes, so I have a lot of friends in who done the same. Basically, I just invited them and said, why don't we use our bicycles and our skills in riding bicycles, and then just provide the access that people need, because that's what people do anyway. And one of the best stories that I can share about the value of bicycles in during times of disaster is when we responded to Typhoon Yolanda in 2013. We went to a village called Sulangan, which is in the southernmost tip of eastern Samar. This is where Typhoon Yolanda actually made landfall back then. We met a guy. He was riding a child's bicycle. If you can imagine, this is a full-grown man riding a child's bicycle with wooden pedals that he made himself. It was rusty, and he had to use, like, I think motorcycle oil, like used motorcycle oil, to just lube all of the moving parts just to get it working. And he did that
Yeah.
because he needed to find food for not just for his own family but also his neighbors. And he actually was able to do that. And so, yeah, basically that's my intro about Bike Scouts.
Yeah. Well, now the connection with Japan is clear. I mean, it's other than what I mentioned, right? So that's pretty cool. Thank you for that story.
Yeah,
Yeah, and what you mentioned about the man who was riding a child's bicycle because he was going looking for food for his family and his neighbors, I just cannot help but notice that mm, the community, the sense of community is so important in the two countries, right? Because during the Great East Japan earthquake here in 2011, so basically people were they were also thinking about those around themselves, not just about themselves, right? So I remember, of course, we were not in anywhere close to to the disaster hit area, but the supply chain in Tokyo was really well, it was broken basically for maybe a week or 2 weeks, and the supplies, food supplies, were kind of disrupted. And I remember that there was a limited number of items in the supermarkets, and also whenever I went to the supermarket after work, people would buy just small amounts of every food, every kind, every item, right? So that there would be more for the people coming after them. And I remember once there were just 2 cups of yogurt left. Bulgaria yogurt, to that it's so very famous here. And I was reaching for the two of them, and my husband said, "No, you take only one and leave the other one because somebody else will need it."
Yeah.
And and it was not just us, everybody else was doing that. And so this sense of community, of well, how can I say, the connection there is so
Yeah.
very strong in the two countries, even though we don't really see Japan and the Philippines as countries that have a lot of common, but they do.
Yeah. And
that's true.
Mizuhama during that, like they had every town had a story, but I found that article in Japanese and I basically translated it and wrote my opinion about it. But it's the same story. They practiced for it, and part of the practice entailed knowing who lives around you and where the elderly are, and then
Yes,
assigning people responsibility to go by the elderly's house and push them up the hill if they have to. And they had like 20 minutes to respond to it, and they did within 20 minutes, and it like 99% of the population survived. I
That's
mean,
amazing.
statistics sound cold. The 1% that perished, it's very sad, but think about that. And these are
Yeah.
elderly people mostly. The supermarket, the owner, the man, he opened it up and just said everybody can go in the supermarket. They pooled gas, and to do run, the way they worked together, it was
Yeah.
all low tech,
Yeah.
but a tremendous success story. And when I read that, I was inspired, but I also thought, wow, the rest of us probably aren't nearly as well repaired. And I was in Hawaii, which is also prone to disasters. So we had the same sense of community. When I fell in love with my community after a tropical storm wiped everything out. After that disaster, I was like, oh my goodness, people came out of the woodwork. People showing up at my door with ice because it was a power outage. They're walking around giving ice away to a
Yeah.
stranger, and the whole community, like, suddenly, and then the real leaders emerge. It's organic. You just see
Yeah.
it, right? And then we had two lava flows. Same thing. The resilience of that community. So these all have one thing in common. They're all prone to these disasters. But what you're doing to me is on par with all that, and
No,
I really
I
appreciate it.
actually love the both the stories that you shared because there's a commonality there actually, and it connects directly to what we have in the Bike Sauce project, what we have at the very core of what we're doing, with Maya's story and with your story, Tim. Um, if you notice, it's a very human experience. because first and foremost, disasters are a human experience. And so when, at least from my experience, when we try to solve a human problem with a non-human approach, that's usually where the disconnect happens. We're trying to
Mhm.
solve things that people don't actually need in that moment. So for example, a mother or a father who is looking after their children, they don't really, they're not looking for like internet connection. They're not looking for fancy
Right.
solutions, right?
Yeah.
If they're wet from the rain or from the flooding, they're just looking for warmth. They're just looking for a dry place, dry clothes. That's what they're looking for. They're looking for food, they're looking for water, the very, very simple
Mhm.
things. And
Survive.
it's so strange because a lot of times when I look at the what's happening during disasters, and we have a lot of chances here in the Philippines to watch disasters as they unfold, a lot of the solutions come from places, and again, we're very thankful for all the help that we're getting, but a lot of the solutions that we see come from places where people don't actually get to experience what it's like being underground. And so the solutions and the timeline and the scheduling for everything that they're trying to do, and I know that they have the best intentions for doing what they do, but it doesn't really connect with what the
Right.
human experience is on the ground. And I think that's a very, very important thing, and which is why the bike scouts exist, because I know that big organizations and everyone else are doing sort of like the difficult stuff, but there has to be someone on the ground that should be looking at and taking care of that human problem.
Yeah.
Yes.
Master the basics. It's really mastering the basics of community resilience for sure.
Exactly. And actually that's where there's a I also find a connection between the Filipino culture of bayanihan, which is basically, of course, um, the local culture in the Philippines of people in their own communities helping each other with local problems, like small things and big things, just helping each other out for no expectation of return. And one thing I noticed is that when we practice bayanihan in the Philippines, it's mostly out of instinct because we have a very strong sense of family, we have a very strong sense of community. So it's very natural for us to do something like that. Like during the pandemic, a lot of people lost their jobs because of their lockdowns, and so people just started collecting food, putting them on tables outside their homes, and with a sign that says "Take what you need."
Oh,
And
Right.
that happened across the country. That wasn't just a project of
yeah.
someone or an organization, and nobody told anyone to do that. It just happened.
It's
And
the
I think,
opposite of hoarding.
yes, exactly,
You're
exactly.
not hoarding, you're giving it away and
And this
sharing.
and the most beautiful thing about that thing that happened actually was that these tables where the food was available, they never ran out of supplies. People kept on giving. People had to take what they needed, but people kept on giving. And you don't know where it was coming from because all of us were affected, right? All of us were in lockdown. All of us, a lot of people lost their jobs. But and yet, if I have a small can of milk that I know I won't be able to use, I'll just give that away. And people kept on doing that throughout the entire experience of the COVID pandemic here in the Philippines. Um, One thing I noticed though is that, again, as I mentioned earlier, with the way we practice Bayanihan culture here in the Philippines, it's out of instinct, which is really great. But there's also something that I've always wanted to learn from Japanese culture, because one thing that, for example, the concept of gaman culture, gaman spirit in Japan, even the idea of, and please correct me if I'm saying these things wrong, ganbaru, for example,
Mm-hmm.
it feels to me like, um, the way that the Japanese practice their sense of community, there's a system to it. It's like someone, or because Japan, I think, has had centuries to think about and practice these things. So there's sort of like a natural system to what things are. They're very well defined, and I think that's something that we could benefit from, not just as Filipinos practicing bayanihan, but also as the bike scouts community, because we're trying to create that culture within the bike scouts where people would naturally find the bike scouts, understand that this is what we do. We solve human problems the moment that problem exists. And so, but I think it would be so much more better if we could adopt, we could learn from sort of like Japanese culture, stuff like that, like Ganbaru. I think there's a version of that that's like Ganbate. I don't know. Again, I'm not
Yeah,
sure if I'm saying
gambari.
these
Yeah,
things right.
yeah.
Yeah,
You know,
Gaman
you
spirit.
you said something though that I think really nailed the essence of it. And in a way, Japanese are very stoic, even if they didn't study the Stoicists, right?
Yeah.
And you mentioned, I think you said how things are. They just acknowledge how things are. And I've noticed this just living with the Japanese lady for 41 years, 42 years, right? Um, when something sudden happens, unexpected, a disaster, something bad, many of my Japanese friends, they just right away accept the reality. Like they are quick to say, okay, got to let go of what I want it to be or of what I wish it was. Like they let's let go of that. And it takes me a day or two to let go of it. It takes, there's a little gap with me. I don't, that's not my natural inclination, right? But it is with them. And maybe it's living in a disaster prone area where you expect the unexpected and like, shikata ga nai, shoga nai, you know? And there, by the way, though, there's a dark side to gaman too. There's the pluses and minuses like everything, right? So maybe that's part of it. Like the idea of just you're accepting reality.
Yeah.
You're accepting reality, right? And then the other thing is you talked about everybody given in the Philippines. When I was in Hawaii and we had these disasters hit, you know, you're distraught at first. You know what the best medicine is? You pitch in and start doing something for others. It selfishly makes you feel better.
Yeah.
It's not really such a giving act. It's partly selfish. And I think when everybody does it, you feel this sudden connection to everybody because
Yeah.
you're not only giving, you're seeing others give, and then it makes you want to, like, you get a reward from it, and it keeps your mind off bad dark thoughts.
That's true.
That's what
That's
I,
true.
you know.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, here in the Philippines, we've had a lot of experience with that, like riding as Bike Scouts volunteers. For example, again, going back to 2013 during the Typhoon Yolanda, because that's the most memorable for us. Um, Everyone sort of like I think kind of like congratulates the Filipinos for being so resilient, and that sort of like connects to what Tim said earlier about just accepting. But again, we don't have a system for it. We don't have a system of thinking
Right,
for it.
it's
It
culture,
just happens to us.
it's baked
Um,
in. Yeah, yeah.
right? If
Mm.
you look at pictures of Filipinos in the middle of disaster areas, the children are smiling, the parents are waving to the camera as if nothing's
Yes,
happening, and
Yeah.
yes.
it's because in a way we do that we accept that okay, this is the reality that we're living in at this moment, and so we just
Mm.
have to go through it. And there's that connection to what you have in Japanese culture. And I'll give a short story again related to that. We met this guy at the airport, at the destroyed airport in Tacloban City, which was one of the hardest hit areas of Typhoon Yolanda. This guy offered he had a vehicle, and by that time, some of the roads were accessible. And he said, "You can use my vehicle. I can drive for you. You don't even have to pay for the gas. I'll find the gas myself." And we just worked together. And of course, we really convinced him to please accept a little bit of help from us because he needed. But the best thing about that story is that a few days later, we found out that this guy was actually looking for his missing son, because the community where they lived was one of the places that was like completely washed away by storm surge waves, multiple storm surge waves, and a lot of people were missing. And this guy was looking for his son, um, and he was thinking that while I'm going around, I might as well help, because a lot of other fathers and mothers are also looking for their children. A lot of people are looking for their relatives, and I know how they feel. And so this is what I can do at this moment. So I'm going to offer it, and you know, it's just it's just amazing
Mm.
for me. I
Yeah,
mean, I
it
live
is.
here, but I still find it amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is amazing, really.
Yeah,
That's the
and
power of culture because you mentioned several times we don't have a system. It's baked in,
Mm.
its values, its assumptions about
Yeah.
reality. It's related to the history, the geography, the just the cultural values that, and that's the thing about culture is a lot of it is invisible assumptions and values that you don't normally think about. You only think about it if you go live in another country and start studying it. But normal people, you're just kind of on autopilot. And it's the things we do unconsciously that reveal our culture the most.
that's
Yeah.
true. It's actually one of the reasons why I'm very thankful and grateful for being invited to your show and to other podcasts as well, and have the chance to talk about our experience here in the Philippines. Because one thing I realized when I started, especially when I started connecting on LinkedIn, because on Facebook is very Filipino. If you're a Filipino on Facebook, it's very Filipino. So you're sort of like connecting to other Filipinos. You're talking to local gossip. But on LinkedIn, I suddenly it sort of like opened up the world for me in a way, and I started talking to like you guys, for example. I met you on LinkedIn, and it's awesome. And one thing I realized quickly is that not a lot of people actually know about the stories, the things that are happening in the Philippines. And I figured that if nobody tells those stories, then people will continue to assume because
Mm.
I listen to a lot of like events online, and they're talking about climate change or talking about climate driven disasters, and a lot of times I realize that they're thinking that there's time to negotiate, to compromise, to sort of like invent things in the future. But climate change is already here. It's been happening, at least in our
Yes.
experience, for
Right.
the past 11 years. And
Yeah.
it's been horrible. Like last year, we had 7 consecutive typhoons, like one every weekend. And then there were 3 category 5s. Category 5 typhoons in the Philippines,
Oh,
300, almost 300 kilometers per hour winds. And there's that big chance of storm surge waves. In fact, there were storm surge waves during last year's series of typhoons. And so this is the reason why, number one, I love talking about this because there's not a lot of people who are. I realized recently that people in other countries they don't actually know that this is happening in the Philippines. They don't know that the Philippines has been ranked as the most vulnerable to climate-driven disasters for the 16 consecutive years now. Number one, that's one thing that we're number one, most vulnerable in the world. And then this is the reason why we're also trying to build technology, our own technology, because for the longest time I realized that I'm an early adopter when it comes to technology, even though I'm an old guy, because I worked in the creative industry and we sort of like didn't have a choice. We had to look at technology and use it. And so I sort of like developed that habit and I brought that habit to our work in resilience. And one thing I realized again is that when it comes to technology, nobody's actually willing to invest in saving lives, in actually, helping people adapt
Mm.
in a real sense, uh, if there's no money to be made. I understand the concept of having to make money to sustain whatever it is that you're building, but I think climate change and climate driven disasters, it's a unique problem. It's a
yeah.
once in a multi-century uh, kind of problem that we can't really apply that kind of thinking, that unless we can make money from the solution, we're not going to do anything about it because it affects all of us. It's a global problem. It's happening in Spain, it's happening in Turkey, it's happening in Syria and everywhere else. It doesn't matter. Even in the US, it's affecting a lot of places in the US, like
Yes.
flooding, fire, and everything else. And so that's why we're trying to build technology, because for the longest time we've been looking for people who would sort of like give us access to the technology that we need on the ground, so we can help people become more resilient. We can educate, we can provide awareness, we can do training, we can respond even in the aftermath of disasters. But to be honest, we haven't found any of that. And so finally, we decided to just build our own. And of course, we have no money. We have zero money. And so what we did was, again, Bayanihan culture, we found engineers. We found people who could do electronics in our own community, and we basically just contributed what we could. And so now we've ended up with our own AI enabled mobile app, which is going to be sort of like the location based real time disaster reporting tool for us. And we built a prototype for our own mesh network device, and we've also built a prototype for our own 6 kilowatt solar power trailer. It's a portable trailer with an integrated water filtration and pump. So we built all of this because these are the things that are actually very, very badly needed by the humans that are affected by climate driven disasters. We have no resilient connectivity. There are a lot of places here that have no actual like regular connection to water and power. And even if we did, like even here in my place, we're just south, a little bit south. We're like 30 kilometers from the capital. If a storm happens, not even a category 5, like a category 3 maybe, within an hour we would lose access to power, and then after that we would lose access to communications. There would be no internet. And so that's a really that's a real problem here in the Philippines, that's creating an impact in the way because I've seen a lot of people coming up with solutions like satellite internet, dashboards and stuff so that you can see supposedly see data about what's happening on the ground. But the problem with this is that when the power goes out, none of this actually works.
Right,
Right.
That's
right,
the
right,
problem.
right,
And
right.
the only reason why Bike Scouts has access to real time data is because we work with people on the ground. We work with communities and we find ways. Like if there's no more communication, there will be riders that will sort of like find another rider to pass on the information until we know what's happening wherever there's like
The
bad things
analog
happening.
system,
Analog, very very
human.
human solution to a human
Yeah, yeah,
problem. Again, going back to that.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, the connection indeed is, I mean, that's the best, the human connection, right? And the analog. And I also wanted to ask you about some recent projects you have initiated there. But before that, please allow me to say thank you to our other sponsor, and that is Hause. They're also known as Hause Inc. You can find them online at www.hause.co.jp and connect with them via the email, which is webmaster@house.co.jp. This is if you have any ideas of doing projects in custom home design and construction or commercial building construction. This is, well, the company you can connect with. You can also see some of their works if you follow James Howell or go to their website, of course. Thank you very much to Hause, and please do not worry about the language barrier because you can talk with them either in English or in Japanese. So, whether you're a foreigner here in Japan, new to the country, or if you're a resident, you're a national of the country, do not hesitate, reach to them and talk with them. And well, so Miles, I have seen, because I follow you on LinkedIn, and I have seen that you have actually started producing vegetables in some communities, I believe.
Growing, yeah. Oh.
Yes, growing vegetables. So, how did you come up with this idea? Could you please tell us a little bit more about the project?
Sure thing. Actually, the community garden is part of our food security activities or initiative, and we've been doing this for I think for as long as the Bikes House has been in existence. But again, it's something that doesn't really have any real funding. Actually, doesn't have it has zero funding. So what we did to start this up is because we discovered that all of the agricultural offices in every city and town in the Philippines actually has seeds, and they even have like natural fertilizer. I forgot the name. Yeah, but basically they have the basic materials for agriculture, and nobody was sort of like getting it from them because, especially in like highly urbanized areas, nobody was doing gardening anymore. But when a disaster happens, when there's a crisis like the COVID-19 pandemic, then there would be a problem. Then people would remember that, oh, we don't have access to food anymore. And so we
Right.
just basically started working on that. It started with basically just bike scouts, individual bike scouts members in their own backyard. I've moved to a different apartment now, but before I had a like a small space, and I had my garden as well in front of my house. Instead of like flowers and stuff, I had vegetables. I'm going to start that up again very soon. But we do have our main community garden here in San Pedro in Laguna, where I'm based, and in different places around the Philippines. We also have that, and the reason for this is because it sort of like helps people remember the that we need to be self sufficient. It's not even because it's an advocacy or a charity or whatever it is. It's just because a lot of Filipinos used to do that in our own front yard and backyard. But slowly, we sort of like lost touch with that activity, and everybody forgot that it's an important thing. But now we're sort of like trying to bring that back by working with students, by working with people and organizations and communities.
Yeah, I remember I tried growing vegetables in Hawaii. I actually built a greenhouse, a mini greenhouse, right? And I'm a city boy, so I had like zero knowledge. I just was going along. I had friends who were good, you know. My challenge was I lived on a volcanic island that's fairly new geologically, and so there was a very thin layer of dirt, and then right underneath is porous rock. Well, guess what? And it rains a lot. It leaches all
Mm.
the nutrients out of the soil. And it was a big challenge to get quality soil. You know, a lot of my friends did it the organic way, which was hard work and knowledge, but they did it. I wasn't quite that advanced. And because we didn't have real seasons per se, pest control was a challenge because you had the
Mm.
pest year round.
Yeah.
And you know everything, jungle rats and birds, and they would eat your tomatoes. And do you face similar challenges in the Philippines? I imagine your soil's probably a lot richer, though. Maybe.
Well, it depends on where you are. Like in the
Yeah.
cities, the main problem is space. People live so close to each other that a lot of times there's no real sunlight. And so
Mm.
what
Yeah.
we've
Gotcha.
done
Yeah. Yeah.
to sort of like adapt to that problem is that because there's a lot of plastic, and so we started collecting the large plastic water containers,
Hmm.
and now we're using that so that people can grow their, like, even an eggplant will grow. And I've grown like many eggplant plants out of a plastic container, and if you take care of it properly, you'll have more than enough eggplants uh
Oh, nice. Yeah,
that,
I
that
love
that you could
eggplants.
want. I ended up actually giving a lot, most of it, to my neighbors,
Yeah.
because there was just simply too much.
Yeah.
And here in the Philippines, we have a lot of recipes for eggplants, and I think you also guys do, you also get to do this in Japan and in other countries as well. So yeah, but we have a unique recipe here. If you're familiar with Philippine adobo, even the eggplant, we can cook that as adobo. So that's actually very tasty with garlic.
Nice. I gotta try it. Yeah.
Wow.
I
Okay.
started liking eggplant when I came to Japan. Hardly ever ate it in the U.S. And
Mm.
it's a little bit different. Japan is really sweet. I think it has a very pleasant taste, the Japanese.
Right.
But yeah,
Yeah,
and
I mean,
yeah,
when you have access to a community garden, and even I myself, sort of like, didn't realize this before, but now that I have access to our main community garden, it's life is so much easier, because like all of the vegetables that I would need, like on a weekly basis, I don't even have to buy anymore, and I take it for granted now because it's already there. And
Right.
the best thing about this community garden is that even without funding, even without support, it's providing food for an entire community. And it's the same thing for all of the other, even the smaller community gardens, even the backyard gardens are providing food for like entire communities as well, like
yeah,
by neighborhood, by house. So it really works. It's just that, again, um there, in recent times, I think there has been this, we've all fallen in love with technological solutions, which is great. There's an application for that, but again, for the daily human experience, for the daily human problems that we have, and we do have that. It's not going to go away just because we have AI. We have to eat, number one.
we have to
And
eat.
a lot,
And
yeah.
as you keep reminding us, systems go down. And
Yes.
my favorite story, it's a very short one, right? So 2008, I think it was, we had a terrible earthquake in the Hawaii chain, to the point where it shut down the computer at Honolulu Airport.
Mm.
Everybody was stopped dead in their tracks. The only airline that took off that evening was JAL, because they had trained all their people to manually write out tickets. They
Yeah.
Right.
didn't say, "Oh, the computer's down. Well, let's just stand around and do nothing. I can't do my job." No, they had the basics mastered. And it was the same thing in manufacturing. Even when we would decide to automate, the policy was always the people have to learn how to make it, because if the automation goes down,
Yeah.
so there was this focus on mastering the basics. That's your foundation. And then, yes, you build technology on top of that. But if you have to revert back to that, everybody has to be trained and ready to do it.
That's very true. And
And
that's
they came
very,
to respect that in the Japanese working with them.
oh yeah, and it's very relevant for more people, actually, not just people in the aviation industry. Because, for example, when we try to find our way around anywhere, like in a city or wherever we go, we depend on our mobile phones. That's GPS. But the
Right.
thing is
Yeah.
that if you run out of battery, if there's like, I don't know, if something happens to the weather and it affects your signal, then basically you're lost. And this is the
Right.
reason why, uh, when we respond to disasters, we make sure that we also sort of like at least have the basics for for land navigation and water navigation, like the basic orienteering compass.
Right.
It doesn't require any batteries. It doesn't require sunlight. Doesn't require anything. It's just basically you look at it and it works. That's all you
Yeah.
need. And yeah, there's a lot of things. There are a lot of things in our lives that we've sort of like forgotten the value of, because we've become accustomed to having some technology for that, and we think that technology will always be there. But again, in countries like the Philippines, all it takes is a little bit of rain and basically power out, and none of the technology actually works. And I can actually relate to Tim's story about JAL and sort of like how they manually wrote out tickets, because my dad used to work for the Philippine Airlines, and
Mm.
that's how he started, by writing, sort of like
Right, the
manually
tickets.
preparing all the, not just the tickets but all the forms. And
Right, right, all the forms, right, right.
I have an uncle who used to work as a flight dispatcher, and the pilots and him, they would work out the weight and balance computations for every flight on paper, or if not, sometimes in their head. And so that's the kind of skill that would come in handy if, like, what if everything, all of the power, like in Tim's experience, what if all of the power goes out? Then what happens? All of us are
Yeah.
grounded. But people who have that skill, people who sort of like, push themselves to do more than what's
Mhm.
expected of them, that's the kind of people who would make things work, would keep things moving, I think.
Yeah, Tim, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I just, as I listened to you, so going back to when I lived in Hawaii, I had the good fortune to hook up with just some really talented people who were from a totally different background than me, like completely different background, right? And one guy, his name's Jay Fitzgerald. He was a sailor, and he originally built his own boat. He's like probably one of the smartest people I've ever met. He's probably got genius level IQ because he can do so much, right? And he went there at a farm, but he ended up going back to his roots. And when he learned to sail, he learned the old way, like totally wind. He learned to, navigate by the stars. And he uses technology, but if it runs out, he knows how to operate manually, like to the point where he can bring his sailboat into a harbor with wind.
Yeah.
That's really hard to do.
Oh yeah.
Most people motor up when they go into the
Yeah.
harbor. He mastered that because that's how they used to do it, like the
Yeah.
old school guys, right?
Yeah.
And he has been like, as sailors are more conscious of weather, climate change than anybody. Like they see it
Yeah.
on a daily basis. They see the depletion of the ocean, the fit, like they're living it directly. And
Yeah.
so he's been an advocate, but he's a little bit of a doomer. He thinks we're too late. We missed the window, and now you got to learn how to survive by your own wits by mastering the basics, right?
That's true.
And so that introduced me to that way of thinking as well. Like if you're really risk averse, which he is, we all are, I think, to a degree, you're going to learn how to do it without relying on technology. You
That's
know,
true. Yeah,
so
I mean that so, a lot of people probably find that hard to sort of like comprehend.
yeah,
But again, we earlier we talked about the sort of like the human problems and the human experience, and we talked about being able to handle things even without technology if things go wrong. And this is the reason why actually we're sort of like building our own tech right now, because we took a look at everything that's available, that we could access in terms of technology, and all of it was never designed for people who can't afford to pay for like stuff. And
yeah,
none of them, like even social media, actually I would argue it was never designed to connect people. It was built for a different purpose.
to exploit people.
Well, and that's the reason why there's so much, like we find toxicity, for example, in social media, because social media was designed, it was built with no real objective. It was just, there was just something, there was an opportunity, and so they built it, and it worked, and it makes money, and that's the measure of success. But I think if we take the sort of like the technology behind social media and give it purpose, like for example, community spirit, why hasn't anyone sort of like injected the sense of community, the sense of responsibility for others
Mhm.
into technology. Technology can amplify that. Technology can optimize, maximize sort of like this sense of community, sense of responsibility for others. There was I read a recent, well, it's not recent, but it's an article from Asahi Shimbun, I think, and this is from a few years ago. And the report was about how even the Japanese people are starting to lose their sense of community. Uh, I think they were talking about the younger people, like most of the people in who are in voting age are sort of when they were asked if they would help or have helped their neighbors, for example, they said no. And so I think this is a worldwide thing that's happening because social media sort of like created, sort of like flooded every
Yeah,
culture with
we
just
weren't ready for
one.
it.
Yeah, exactly.
Our
And so I think
cultures
it's time.
weren't
I
ready
think I
for it.
think it's time to like having this conversation with you guys and people listening to this. There's a way of bringing that back and building technology that's specifically designed to bring back a sense of community and sense of responsibility for others. I think that's something that everyone has to sort of like think about, and if they have the means, they should get into it, I think.
Yeah, I would just only add that I believe that social media technology, I don't know if it was designed this way, but by default, it dehumanizes people,
I agree.
which to me leads to toxicity. People will say stuff that they would never say to your face ever,
Mhm.
and they
That's true.
say it because they can.
That's
And
true.
because the other person, you don't see the humanity in them. And I've been guilty of making a sarcastic comment, and I'm much better now because I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to, like, there's enough negativity on the internet now without me adding to it. So I really try to keep things positive. And I've actually like written remarks. I'm like, wait, that's not positive. I'm not going to write it. Or I've posted it and then deleted it because I'm like, why did I write that? So it is easy to be snarky and throw stuff out
That's
there. So, but I think as individuals, we can do our part by just trying to be human and trying to inject humanity in this in the experience online.
true. I agree. And I sort of like observed this when we started building the Bike Scouts community, because Bike Scouts community, we don't have a lot of rules actually. We don't tell people that you can't do that, you can't say this, you can't say that. And but what happened was that nobody was actually being toxic. In the entire 11 years that we've had a community, and we have multiple groups on Facebook, we have
Right.
multiple pages and stuff like that. Nobody actually does anything toxic in any of our communities, and we don't even have a rule written on any
Mhm.
of these pages that forbids people from doing certain things. It's
Yeah.
just that when they join the Bike Scouts, they join it because they discovered the culture first. They discovered the purpose first, before
Yeah.
before the tech, before the
That's a beautiful
platform.
idea.
Yeah,
I like
yeah,
that.
exactly. And that's people who join communities like the Bike Scouts. And this, I think, this is possible if people would only invest or help build communities online or technology for it that are specifically designed for people to get back to being human again, to being, the best version of ourselves, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, as you say, well, in times of natural disaster or any other disaster, actually, we do become the best versions of ourselves,
That's true.
right? And
Very true.
but it's sad that we have to get to the point of being caught in a disaster, right? Because before that, there are so many other opportunities to work on this, and once again, be humans to the
Yeah,
people around us as well. A
Yeah,
that's
sad.
true.
I've come to think of social media as like a funnel. And you get exposed to a bunch of people you would never
Mm.
get exposed to. Certain people resonate with you. And then with really thanks to the pandemic, I mean, I hate to give the pandemic credit for anything, but thanks to the pandemic, this technology became more available and more common. And it's not as good as meeting somebody. That's the best, but it's the next best thing. And it's not practical for me to meet Miles because we're far away from each other, right? So,
Mhm.
but you at least get to see the human being. And during the pandemic, I was connected to Maya, but we didn't have a human relationship. I respected her from afar, Because she was a non-native English speaker who wrote like a native, and I didn't know she wasn't native until she told me. But we ended up talking to each other first on Clubhouse, the
Right.
first
Yeah.
voice, a real conversation that humanized us to each other, right? And a friendship
Yeah.
developed, and I've made a few other friends, right?
Yes.
See,
Yes.
that's my sweet spot with social media is a funnel. Okay, who's a kindred spirit? And then pull them, and if I can meet them, I want to meet them, right?
That's
I
true.
don't know any other solution. That's just how I deal with it.
Yeah. No, I mean, even this podcast that you have, this is a community. And whenever, like, I've joined other podcasts not about bike scouts, and I've listened into the conversations you have with your other guests and the people who listen in, and I realized that you have sort of like the same kind of thing going on as we have in the bike scouts. Everyone is being positive, everyone's being supportive, everyone's contributing something. And that's because when you launch this podcast, you were very clear about what it was for and what you wanted to achieve with it. Unlike a lot of technology that we have right now, when you really take a look at it, it's really just for making money. And again, I don't have anything against making money, but technology right now is at the level that it's very life changing. It's very culture
Mhm.
altering. That I think we
Yeah.
need to be, if we can't be careful about how we build it, then I think some of us would have to repurpose at least. And people like us who have these conversations, people like us who do the work of sort of like generating a little bit more positivity in our own communities, in our own countries, in our own towns and villages, I think we should start looking at this technology and start, repurposing them, providing the sense of purpose as a clear objective,
Ooh,
Objective.
you
not just
froze. You
because we
froze.
can build it, not just because we can make money from it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Humanize it. Let's humanize each other. That's technology
Yes,
for
exactly.
humanization.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you read about, again, just going back to Japanese history and even recent history, like when all of the disasters that happened, like Fukushima and everything else, there are sort of like I would say thousands of stories of human stories of like people helping each other, doing really nice stuff for each other, and that's where I think it's easy to find the sense of purpose for everything that we're building.
Yeah.
Right, like I read this story about how someone with electric vehicles, I think, used that to help people in disaster affected areas there in Japan. That's technology that was
Oh,
never
yeah.
designed for that purpose, but
Right,
a
right.
human being thought that this is something that can help people, and they made it happen. And so
Yeah.
it's the same thing. It's the same thing that we're trying to achieve with bike scouts, with zero with zero funding. But yeah, we're trying to get it then.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I think that was Azareo. He wrote about the batteries of the cars that could be used reversely to power houses or other devices that are
Clever.
necessary. Yes, necessary during the during disasters.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. And
Yeah. But
that's a very local solution. That's a very human solution to a human
Yeah.
problem. And it helps. It actually helps because it has local context. It addresses
yes.
what's actually happening. The solution that they come up with is not something that someone far away sort of just imagined. And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people who come up with solutions are very intelligent, they're very well educated, but without local context, a lot of times it ends up being disconnected. So I think
Yeah,
that's one of the
because
things. Yeah.
if you're not there, you just cannot imagine what is necessary at that point of time.
Yeah.
And I have noticed that it is, people can be empathetic, but empathy without experience that puts you in that context, as you say, is really difficult because it most of it very regrettably goes to waste, right? And it remains as something just a feel good gesture. So yeah, local context, a lot of knowledge there, a lot of experience are very important for putting that empathy to work and really making the best of it.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
true.
and
I
they
mean,
listening to you, just a light bulb went on. When the Japanese approach Kaizen in a factory, they don't go take the industrial engineers and impose their ideas and say, here's how we're going to redesign it. They go from the inside out, kind of what you're doing, community based. They go to the operators, and one, it starts with respect. These operators do the job every day.
Mhm.
They all have brains. They know the job better than we do. So, also a little humility. Let's teach them to think like an industrial engineer and use their ideas and implement their ideas. Plus, it'll motivate them. Like, that's the approach, inside out. And I see a parallel with the way you're doing it. You People have to improve, and be resilience. To me, it's still, you're improving whatever the condition you've been handed, right? You got to do something
Yes,
to survive,
exactly.
right? And
Yeah,
it seems
exactly.
like the same
Because
approach, a
it
microcosm of it.
is. It is exactly the same approach. Because one thing that I always keep on repeating is that the scale of the problems that climate-driven disasters is creating, it can only ever be matched by the scale of people taking action in their own communities. And for that to be effective, we need to enable people. We need to give people the things that they need: technology, training, anything that they need. Because unless we do that, and if we keep on just trying to invent things
Mm.
and forcing that on people in communities where it doesn't actually apply, we will never be able to solve the problem of resilience for climate driven disasters. So yeah, that's actually very very accurate, Tim. Thank you so much for that.
And that's an ongoing process, right? You cannot just do it once a year and and say, okay, we're done for the next 5 years. So it needs to continue. It needs to be sustainable.
It's a
And
process that goes on
yeah,
forever.
right.
Yes, exactly.
Humanity, you got to stay connected, right?
Yes, exactly. Because resilience, for in practice, from what we've experienced ourselves trying to make it happen here in the Philippines, resilience can't be just a training kind of thing. It has to be a habit that eventually turns into part of the culture. If it's not a habit for people to practice resilience, if people don't forget that the resilience they're practicing is actually something that helps them, if they keep on thinking, oh, I have to do this because someone told me that I must do this, it will never work. It's the same thing. Like for example, when we try to train people, at least here in the Philippines, we have trainings for example CPR, which is very very helpful, which is a very very useful skill. But if you do it only once, and the
You
person
forget,
who no, it's not just that you forget. Any person who has trained once in CPR and they're pushed into a real life situation where they have to apply that, they will panic because it's not normal to see people
right?
sort of like suffering in front of you and
Right,
trying. And
right.
even though you have the skills, supposedly you have the training, you would not be able to apply it. So it
In
has to
that,
be
yeah,
a
yeah,
regular thing. It has to be a habit.
yeah.
Yeah, it
I
needs to be, yeah, a habit, indeed, become a habit.
Yeah,
Trained to the point where it is kind of automated reaction or action on behalf of the
exactly.
person. Yes.
Even it's the same as sort of like the sense of community there in Japan that I admire greatly. I don't think people are being made to practice that. I don't think. I mean, yes, I've heard Japanese on YouTube complain that there's so much things that they have. There's so many rules that they have to follow. But I think it's more of by instinct by now for a lot of Japanese. Even
Yeah,
if they
a
are
lot.
against certain things, they
true.
would still do it. Like being quiet on the train, for example. Even if they say that, why should I be quiet on the train? But they would still do it, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Even if they
they
even if a
choose to do
Japanese,
that. They choose to
exactly,
do that without
because
thinking
it's
about it. Yeah,
because it's
yeah,
already a habit. And try
yeah,
try to imagine what will happen if we can translate that kind of habit into resilience. Then yeah, at the scale of communities around the world, then that would be the time that we would be able to say that we've actually accomplished true local community resilience. Because projects, government regulations, all of these things, they sound nice, they look nice on paper, but in reality they will never work.
right.
Because people we are very emotional. We are a thinking creature, we reason to ourselves. We always have, on a daily basis, we change our opinion of things. Like maybe today I will say, oh, I'm not going to use plastic anywhere, but then tomorrow something
Yeah,
happens that, oh, maybe I'll just make an excuse. That's what happens. But slowly, if we use the sort of like our habit forming things and turn that into a culture, there's a bigger chance that it will stick, that it will
yeah.
make a difference.
yeah,
Yeah. I think Japanese are conditioned from childhood to view themselves as a fraction of a whole,
Yes.
not a disconnected entity. Now, some people go in that direction, but
Yeah.
overall, that's the default mode. Okay.
Yeah.
In my culture, you're like this individual, right? There is a disconnect. I feel like, right? And so some of these are not, they're not techniques that you can just, that can just be taught. You almost have to reprogram people.
Yes.
And Maya and I have talked about this a lot. When we see non-Japanese go into a Japanese company and they struggle and they struggle and they struggle and they can't figure out, some of it is that they don't understand the culture, but some of it is that they undervalue the importance of human connection, of building human relationships. Like, very, to me, that's the building blocks. If you can
Yes.
go in and find friends and allies and people you vibe with and connect with and build trust with them, your life gets much easier, and things go more smoothly. And yes, there are techniques on top of that can be taught, but if that doesn't happen and you just teach the techniques and they don't feel connected to the whole, it's not going to become that habit. It's not going to be part of your default mode. And to
That's
me,
true.
that's the only way I've found to make any of this stuff work, is to teach people how to connect and let them experience it and see the value in it themselves,
That's
so
true.
they want to do it.
That's
Yeah.
true. And I have sort of like an experience like that, even when working with communities on resilience, even on disaster response, because a lot of times people come into communities and because they're trained, because we have training, for example, for how to do disaster response, we tend to force ourselves on like the local community that no, this is the proper way to do things, and that creates sort of like friction when trying to
Resistance.
accomplish
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one thing I learned is that just because I'm a master of something, or at least I claim to be, doesn't mean that I have to be a master all of the time in the
Right.
face of people, right? There's a
Yeah.
way to apply mastery without creating that friction. Like we can work with people who are already there, and sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong, but there's a way to work with them that you share, that you give them your mastery, so that they can in a lot of ways here in the Philippines, and I think I can imagine same thing in Japan, that it preserves their dignity
Yeah.
in their own community,
Yes.
but
Yes.
Yes.
still be able to accomplish the things, the important
Yeah.
stuff that you need to accomplish. So yeah, I can really completely relate to that.
Yeah.
Yeah. We used to educate groups how to approach a problem. We'd go out on the floor with them and show them how to use a stopwatch. Then we'd hand them the stopwatch and say, "Okay, you start doing this." And we would back off. We would just teach them to do it themselves. And that was a very effective way, because we guided them. We didn't reject their ideas. We said, "Okay, let's throw up all the ideas on the wall, and here's the guidelines. Let's prioritize together."
Yep.
So people didn't feel like they were not, anything was being forced on them. We weren't just throwing away their ideas on a whim. We were guiding them to think a certain way, but we still wanted it to be their ideas. It's strategic.
Exactly.
It's
Exactly.
how to, it's part of introducing change in a way that people will accept it. If it's their idea, people don't hate change. They hate change being imposed on them.
Yes, exactly.
If it's
Exactly.
their idea to change, they love it. So that's what you got to
Exactly.
do. You got to make it their idea, right?
Exactly.
Very
I
much.
I, I learned part of this during my work as a creative director in the in the design industry. A lot
Yeah.
of times, people who are in a leadership position would try to force people to do things their way, because they believe that's the only way
Yeah.
that it would work. But what I discovered is that if you let other people's creativity shine through, you would discover a lot of better ways to do things. And
Yes.
the only thing that you need to do as a leader is to make sure that it follows the direction that it needs to follow, so that you can accomplish the task. And I
Yeah.
apply the same thing when it comes to resilience, when it comes to working with communities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great. So, okay, Miles. So, please tell us where, yes,
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
people
We
find,
went over time.
yeah,
I'm having so much
yes.
fun. But yeah.
How can people help? How can they donate?
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
well, number one, of course, would be they can find me on LinkedIn. They can just message me anytime. They can add me. Please do add me. even if it's just to say hello. And then we have a brand new website. It's bikescoutsproject.org.
Right.
Um,
We could
Please,
put that link.
yeah, all of the information is there, and there's a link also to our PayPal because that's something that we badly need, again, because we don't actually have like regular funding, and even just to keep the lights on, like on a daily basis. Like for example, last year during the seven consecutive typhoons, we had zero money. And so, but we were fortunate enough that the some friends of Bike Scouts from Singapore got in touch, and they really supported us, and we were able to send the funds to our team so that they could provide water, food, and medical supplies to all of the communities that they were working in. And a lot of these communities were actually the isolated communities that nobody was actually going there because it was just too difficult to reach. But we're local. That's the value of Bike Scouts, because we're local. We're already there. We're already deployed when these disasters happen, and so that's why we were able to provide help when help was needed. And so yeah, please do visit bikescoutsproject.org. So that's bikescoutsproject.org. All of the information is there about us. You can contact us through the website as well. And then there's a link to our PayPal so that we can please help us keep the lights on.
Right on. All
Yeah,
right. Thank you so much for coming on. It's a great cause. I love it.
Thank
yeah.
you so much as
Thank
well.
you. And thank you for sharing all the stories of the bike scouts and the local communities there, because that's what helps us feel for them. Yeah. Thank you very much for this,
All
Smile.
right,
And
man, we went over, but this was so much fun. I always enjoy
yeah,
talking. Yeah, I get creative and start thinking, just the juices start flowing when I talk to you. So I really appreciate that.
yeah.
Thank
Okay, thank you. So, well, and to everybody who watched us or will watch us later, have a good day, have a good week, and remember Miles and the Bike Scouts project. So, thanks a lot. And then one more shout out for our sponsors, Kanachu.com and House Inc. Here we go.